Offspring of Incest. What's your story and how is your life? I was adopted when I was 2. I am extremely close to my parents. They never kept it a secret that I was adopted. It really was no big deal until I got into those angsty teenage years and felt like I wanted to find my real parents. When I was 12, I found a small safe in my parents' closet and tried to find out anything I could. I found some information such as my original last name. But that was about it. Fast forward to about 6 years ago. I developed a bunch of pretty serious illnesses and was curious to see if anything was due to my genetic makeup. I met with a social worker from the state that I live in and he facilitated getting some info for me. He offered me the opportunity to meet my bio mother. I declined. I received a packet with my medical information. It turns out that my birth mother claims that her brother is my bio dad. Every woman in my bio mom's family, grandmother, aunts, etc. had significant mental health issues and all of them had their bio children taken away due to serious neglect and alcoholism. So I don't drink. That kind of messed me up for a while and I felt a tremendous amount of shame. I asked my mom if she knew that I was potentially a product of brother-sister incest. And she said that they found out during the adoption phase. However, I was also told to take the information with a grain of salt since my birth mother apparently had a long history of mental illness. I don't think I will ever know for sure. But I try really hard not to think about it too much and focus on my great parents who love me endlessly and gave me a truly terrific life. I still struggle with the possibility. It makes me feel kind of dirty. The only people that know are my parents and my husband. I secretly hope that my bio mom was making it up due to her illness. Edit. Just wanted to say thanks to everyone for all the kind words. I really wasn't sure if I should post this. You folks are awesome. My parents are first cousins. I only got some hormonal problems but it's not too serious. It's really embarrassing. The younger ones in my family don't know it and neither do any of my friends. It would be horrible if they knew. A girl in my school once joked about my parents being cousins because I'm Middle Eastern and I nearly got an heart attack but I just laughed it off since I knew it was just a joke. I have some acquaintances, 2 Indian sisters, adopted by an American family when they were babies. Apparently they were the product of their uncle raping their mother. These girls grew up to be gorgeous geniuses, so it worked out okay for them. I work with 2 children who were born because of incest. The boy's microcephalic, small head, cerebral palsy, severe adult and developmental delay. He's almost a teenager but is as functional as a 6-year-old and is on a toddler education level. He will probably need care his whole life. His parents were uncle niece but his mom was delayed as well. The girl was born from a brother and sister. They have 4 kids total and she is the only one with issues. I swear she has Marfan syndrome. Her joints are incredibly loose and she has very long fingers and toes. Her brain isn't able to process light properly so she's legally blind. She's also severely autistic which is probably unrelated to her parents being siblings but it actually benefits her because she's incredibly smart. She's 10 now and is learning to communicate well and is excelling in school these days. She's actually starting going to regular school now. In a special class because she's blind. But we have hopes that she will be able to go to the normal classes in a few years. She's still not potty trained. But that's expected when you have her level of autism and being blind. The worst thing I've ever seen as a pediatric CNA isn't the children from incest though. It's the children from parents who drank or did drugs while pregnant. Such beautiful children who would have been perfectly fine if their mothers hadn't put poison in their bodies. To be honest, I didn't consider myself a product of incest until I read the comments here. My parents are first cousins. I come from a country where that's normal and lived all my life in another country where it is the norm. I think I'm pretty normal and my siblings too. We all ended up being atheists in a country where you can get held for that. Smart and open-minded. So in the eyes of my culture there's probably something wrong with us. I have 2 siblings-in-law, adopted. Obviously, who are the product of incest. Both have mental deficiencies. One is in legal trouble relating to child porn. The other has Prader-Willi syndrome, meaning they will eat anything and a huge amount. Due to never ever feeling full. Neither will ever live completely independently. Not me, but a kid in school that I work sub at occasionally. His mother is the direct product of incest. Her father raped his daughter. And he is an absolute delight. Let me tell you. He spends most of his time in a special ed classroom with 3 or 4 other students. And he is always helping out his classmates and his teachers when he can. He saw me at a local event and wanted to introduce me to his mother. She's got no teeth. And just looks ragged and worn. But she is one of the sweetest people I've ever talked to. He'll be alright. I think he's being groomed to be a custodian or something. But it's nice to know that such horrible conditions don't have to define an individual. My old neighbor was the product of a father raping his daughter. She had some cognitive impairment that seemed like early onset dementia, but was very slow to progress. Diabetes and tons of mental health issues, hoarding, schizophrenia, agoraphobia, just about everything imaginable. If it was a thing back then, she would have also been on the autism spectrum. She had 2 children herself, non-incest, that were profoundly mentally ill and also somewhat intellectually disabled. The son was a horribly abusive paranoid schizophrenic and the daughter was a hoarder. They were all living together off of disability. Police raided their home and found they were living in filth with the dead rotting bodies of their pets everywhere. And the entire building was condemned by the health department. The son and daughter, adults in their 50s, wandered off never to be found. Their mother became homeless and ended up in a state-run nursing home. We were her only visitors. In my mother's family, there was a lot of sexual abuse, especially from a stepfather. My mother is the oldest of 7 siblings. She has 2 full siblings. And the other siblings are clearly of another father. Trust me, they don't need a DNA test. For years there was a question of who fathered who. But now that everyone's an adult, their character, their traits, it's just too obvious who fathered who. Because of how much sexual abuse went on. A lot of kids were born from those half-siblings. Considering the number of problems that range from physical abnormalities to mental disorders, I'm thoroughly convinced that at least some of these kids are a product of incest. And not all a matter of she whored around at 15 like they would lead you to believe. It isn't that far-fetched considering he did. In fact, great some of them. One of these uncle cousins was feral. His mom was young, didn't know what she was doing with a baby, and left him in the crib all the time. He didn't get enough stimulation. No one talked to him. So he became feral. It's a sick situation. He's in his 40s now and can hardly carry on a conversation. He is a good guy but tends to fall for a lot of conspiracies and other nonsense. He's never had a career. He slurs his speech and can barely understand basic concepts. Out of everyone in the family, he is probably the best living example of how that family treats human life, like garbage. Basically, no one stepped in and fixed the problem. Thankfully my mother did not, to my knowledge, get abused by that man. Her little sister did, unfortunately. And my grandmother has since divorced him. These aren't rednecks either. They live in New York in a suburban community. These aren't ghetto thugs. Needless to say, I stay far away from these people. My parents are first cousins. They share the same grandfather. It's not weird at all in my family. It's talked about openly for as long as I can remember. I remember hearing stories about my mom and dad growing up a couple streets away from each other. My brother and I are not affected at all by them being first cousins. Just the divorce, alcohol and drug abuse growing up. Meh. My parents were step siblings. They were raised together from young teenagers, but didn't have me until my mom was 28 I think. Anyway, my father robbed a convenience store while my mother was pregnant and was in jail for 4 years. He got out and they got back together. He did a bunch of heroin 6 months later and me and my mom found him dead. 6 months after that my mother dropped me off with some of her junkie friends and never came back. They left me at a church and eventually the police found me. My mother was found dead in her car from an overdose the next day. My grandmother swears she was murdered by the mob for threatening to inform on them about my father's death. I really have no idea. But I think it's her coping strategy. I was raised by my mother's mom and father's dad. And they were extremely normal college educated people. I've got a host of the mental issues my parents did, but I keep putting one foot in front of the other. Telling the story of my parents just sounds like it happened to somebody else now. Not so great. Actually. My father, who suffered from severe mental illness, died before I was born. My mother died in childbirth. So I was mostly cared for when I was young by my older brother, who seems to have inherited whatever mental problem our father had. We traveled around a lot when we were kids. From city to city. Never staying very long. We were even across the sea from home most of the time. My brother was abused. Physically, sexually and mentally. Never had any real friends or family who weren't awful. My brother made me marry some guy we didn't even know. Whose language we don't even speak. Just because he had some money. He raped me. Every night. For years. My brother got mixed up in some shady anti-government stuff and died. And then my husband went into a coma the same day our son was stillborn. It's gotten a little better recently. Though. Just a year or so since that day. And now I've got 3 healthy children. A better personal life. And I'm the ruler of a small city-state. Soon. The Targaryens will return to Westeros. There was a woman in my pregnancy and infant loss group that had a really tragic case of accidental incest. We live in a town where there's a military base and soldiers from Great Britain often come and train there. Well, this woman met a soldier at the club one night and they hit it off and started seeing each other. They discovered they both had family from a little obscure town in England. She was born there and her mother brought her to Canada when the mom split up with the dad. She grows up not ever having contact with her father as a result. Anyhow, this girl ends up pregnant by this soldier and doesn't get proper prenatal care other than her anatomy scan at 18 weeks. When the baby was born, he had severe deformities and was lacking a bunch of his bones in his limbs. At Children's Hospital, they do a genetic workup on the parents and baby and within a couple of days, the baby dies. The genetic counselor ended up contacting the lady and telling her she needed to come in for an appointment. She does, and it turns out that her and the soldier are half siblings and they both had a specific gene mutation that had been passed on to their baby, resulting in whatever disease caused him to not develop parts of his skeleton. In the course of a few days, she lost her baby. Found out her boyfriend was actually her brother and went off the deep end and started using all kinds of drugs. Listening to her story made me feel uncomfortable and physically sick. It was awful. I felt sorry for her but also felt disgusted even though I knew it wasn't really her fault. I am not her offspring but was a teaching assistant at a private school for children that were either the public school system kicked out or could not handle. I'll never forget this girl. Her grandpa was her father. She was 19 or 20 and had to wear diapers all of the time. She suffered from severe autism and was the absolute sweetest girl. This was a couple of years ago, but if I remember correctly she was doing schoolwork at about a 2nd to 3rd grade level. The last day of school. Her, and almost all of the kids, were so sad and did not want to leave for summer as we were pretty much the only steady constant figures they had. I actually ended up seeing her while I was walking home from work about a year after the school closed. She still remembered my name and gave me a big hug. I'll never forget it. My mama is from a tiny town in the deep south. But contrary to popular belief, there was very little actual incest and breeding going on, and trust me, I would know if there were. My relatives are vicious gossips. A couple of first cousin marriages, but even that was very rare. It used to be more common among upper class southerners. Think Ashley and Melanie from Gone with the Wind. But my mother's family are all dirt poor sharecroppers. There was no wealth to keep within the family. There is, however, one bizarre couple from my mother's hometown. A guy married his stepmother. Now, this would be merely questionable if she had, say, married his dad when he was 18 or older and a more or less independent adult. But no, she married his dad when he was like 8 or 9. Then like 10 years later his dad dies. And the stepson marries his stepmom. Then they had a couple of kids together. I always wondered what the dynamic was like in that family. Dad. Mom is being so unfair. I know. She was like that to me when I was your age. My mom was raped by my uncle as a young teenager and became pregnant with me. I was raised not knowing about this for obvious reasons. But found out years later when I was in my early 20s and my uncle and father came to visit my mother after being absent from her life for over 2 decades. Trying to apologize for what he'd done and make amends. I did not find out he was my father until after we had hung out a bunch and been hunting and fishing together. He initially told me that my mom didn't like him because he never stood up for her against their abusive father. He and I became close and he started helping me out with a small business that I had taken over from a friend. But then eventually the truth came out and he told me about how he and my mom were actually involved sexually with each other from a young age due to them both being abused by their father and their crazy mother. I had no idea about any of this since I was never told about my real grandparents. Eventually the consensual stuff between my mom and uncle got pretty involved until she realized it was wrong but he still wanted it. And ended up raping her. That's when he ran out of her life. But he had no idea she got pregnant with me because she got married soon thereafter. When I was a little kid she got remarried and had another kid. My half brother. Mom and I became estranged when I was a teenager and I ran away. But recently we had grown closer since I came back to where she was living with my now grown up half brother. She died not too long ago and I think my half brother had something to do with it. I know he's not the product of incest. But there is something definitely wrong with him. He was checked into a mental facility after he started thinking he was her and wearing her clothes like some kind of freak. I still don't trust him. My great grandmother married her uncle. My grandma is an odd one. She would probably have been diagnosed with developmental disabilities had that been a thing in the 1930s. Hard to say if that's a result of the incest though. My great uncle, grandma's brother, is normal and fine. My brother is my father. It's ducked up. My mother groomed him from a young age to be her perfect lover and they had me when he was 17 and she was 35. I grew up thinking he was my brother and that my dad had left the family. But I found out the truth when I walked in on my brother and mother having sex when I turned 14. I was absolutely horrified and I confronted them and they told me the truth. I felt betrayed and disgusted, so that night I took my belongings and left home. Haven't spoken to them since. They were the only family I had since my mother also left her family and never spoke to them again at a young age. I'm 24 now.